everyone, my name is Jovana. I'm 24 years old and I'm a type and graphic designer from Belgrade, Serbia. I'm also freshly graduated from the Type and Media course in the Netherlands. And today I'm going to be talking about Petria, which is my graduation project at Type and Media. So even before moving to the Netherlands and kind of like being interested in type design, I was actually really keen on photographing old street signage in my hometown. And I also think that this interest of mine that I have kind of like played an important role in the topic and the research that I chose for my project. So today I will tell you a little bit more about Petria and kind of like everything that went on behind the project like this. Okay, so a few words about Petria and the idea behind it. Petria is actually a typeface that was intended for inner city signage, and it's inspired by old Art Nouveau signs and the overall art movement that was present on the Balkans in the 20th century. Its Roman and italic were born out of this idea of designing a type family that would be used for street signage and wayfinding for Belgrade, Serbia. Petria started out as a typeface where legibility and solving this existing problem of combining two different scripts, such as Latin and Cyrillic, in the same place was the main focus, but it actually evolved into depicting Belgrade's character and rich history. I also wanted to treat this typeface as I was trying to describe a person through letter forms and capture in essence its character and all the feelings that were associated with it. Petria started out with a clear idea in mind, so both when it comes to its application and both when it comes to its aim. With my graphic design background, I was kind of like used to designing things for a strict and specific purpose, so drawing a typeface that I could treat in a similar way seemed like a promising opportunity for me to learn and understand what the essentials for a project like this would be. It actually became a process of trying to understand how to channel the energy I wanted the shapes to carry while still serving its initial purpose. So the project started out in February, and I was really lucky to be able to spend this time back home in Serbia, just because I was able to look at a lot more Cyrillic examples than I was back in the Netherlands. So here at the top, you can see some of the photos of old signs. Some of them are in Belgrade, and some of them I found online, but all of them are kind of like really interesting and influenced by Art Nouveau. Also, I didn't want to kind of like limit myself to looking at just old signage. I wanted to look at everything that was inspired by Art Nouveau from this period. So that also meant looking at Art Nouveau influences in other media, such as like printed publications from this period. So here on the bottom, you can see a few examples of old Yugoslav magazines and newspaper that I really like and that were definitely influenced by Art Nouveau. Of course, the first step was to look at the existing signs and what is on the streets of Belgrade at this point. Here on the right, you can see a few more examples that were in use up to a few years ago. Actually, some of those you can kind of like still see in some parts of Belgrade. There's a lot of problem with the shapes. They're really wonky, but they have a really nice character and atmosphere that I can't really tell about kind of like the new system that's being in use. Here on the right, you can see the system that's in use today, and I was actually visited the Ministry of Infrastructure in Serbia, and I was able to kind of like flip through this document when they had everything written down, so I was able to see the dimensions of the board, see the typeface that was being in use, and see how they would treat it in different cases. So here on the right, on the left bottom part, you can see just kind of like enlarged part of one of the signs that's being in use right now in Belgrade. Also, being a type designer, I was mostly interested in the typeface that was being used. They were claiming to be using a type family that had three different styles. So one was a kind of like a normal or regular, one was the wide or extended one, and one was like a narrow condensed one, which of course made perfect sense because having three different widths of your typeface would make sure that you can fit all the street name lengths onto these fixed size boards. So in theory, that was amazing. But when I kind of like took a closer look into these examples. So here on top, in the top on the left, you can see this is just a large part of this specimen on the right. So this is what should actually be used and what this narrow style should look like. But when you kind of like look at it in the application or on the actual sign, this is what it looks like. So it's pretty clear that they were, even though they had 3 different styles they could use, they were still squeezing and stretching type as they wish, which was of course terrible. So at this point I kind of understood that looking at existing signs will not really help me and that I have to move on, just start my own thing. Also, I was trying to figure out for a really long time which typeface this is. I asked a lot of people, I talked to my teachers, and one of them actually told me that this is just like an adaptation of a Helvetica that was done in the late 60s by an unknown Serbian engineer. And this is why it has such weird names. So C Swiss stands for Cyrillic Swiss, and then YL Swiss stands for Yugoslav Latin. So it was just an adaptation. It definitely wasn't custom typeface, so I knew I had to move on from here. So the first thing I wanted to do before sketching, I wanted to look at already existing typefaces. I kind of knew the qualities that I wanted my typeface to carry, but I've never worked on a signage typeface before, and I also didn't know what the proportions should be like, and I just didn't really know where to start from. Meta is a typeface that I really like. It has the elements that I wanted my typeface to carry, which is a tall X height, rather shorter ascenders and descenders, and then also has Cyrillic as well. So what I did in the beginning, I would print just a straight name and Latin and Cyrillic in a big size, and I would pin it outside of the Type Media Studio on the wall and just kind of like observe it from the distance. I also knew I wanted to get away from this kind of like traditional approach where you would design only capitals for the street signage, and I wanted to use lowercase, and I was like trying to understand how to draw lowercase shapes as distinctive to the human eye as possible. I was also applying a lot of tracking because I was aware of the fact that caps will not make the type more legible. It's the spacing that makes it more legible. So I was applying different tracking to meta, observing from the distance and trying to figure out what is the best way to deal with a project like this. These were the initial sketches, which are really close to my heart. They're definitely not signage material. They're type cooker-like sketches, but I think they were really important part of the process just because those were the things that I would go to every time I felt like I was stuck, every time I felt like I was drawing the same thing over and over again. And yeah, every time I kind of like needed a break, I would go back to these things, and yeah, I really like them. It was time to start sketching. As I said, I knew I wanted my typeface to be on the narrow side. I wanted my typeface to be on the narrow side, but I didn't really have anything to compare it with, right? So I wanted to really start off by sketching extremes. So this is the approach number 1, where sketch something extremely narrow, extremely condensed. I wanted to see how far I can take these small counter spaces and how thin my junctions can be before disappearing. I also included some of these Art Nouveau elements, such as uneven counters, which you can see in E and A. And I was also applying different tracking and just kind of like observing it from the distance to figure out how will spacing influence these shapes. The approach number 2 was totally different. It was a lot more soft, a lot more free. My teacher Eric used to joke that this looks like something like a toothpaste font. But yeah, I tried to do a completely different thing, draw something that's a lot more friendly, and I was aware that this is not the right path to follow either, but it was just, I just had to get it on the paper to understand that I had to come up with something else. And then over time, I came up with this sketch, which was a combination of like the first 2 approaches, and I would say the best of the both worlds. So I still kept it on the narrow side, I still kept the flared stems, I still kept this kind of like cursive inspired shapes such as E, and yeah, the most important thing, I was sketching Latin and Cyrillic at the same time because I was aware of the fact that these 2 scripts will influence each other a lot and the shapes will change as I keep on working on them. So the first digitization of the Roman as we all expect, wasn't as great as I thought it would be. I used to joke and say that this first digitization is what would happen if Hobo met Comic Sans. No, but seriously, there was a lot of elements I kind of like wanted to incorporate into Petria, but I was just taking them too far. At this point, I really didn't understand that I have to tone them down. And even though I want to have these uneven counters and cursive-like shapes, all of that needed to be toned down. So from here, this was still in February, I kind of just kept on working. So I wasn't only like thinking about the letter shapes itself, I was also thinking about proportions, because I started off with one value, but I was pretty sure that that wasn't the right one. It was really on the light side and a too narrow side. So I quickly introduced 4 more masters, weight and width, so I can kind of like interpolate and find the right value in between. While kind of like thinking about the proportions, I was also thinking about kind of like the contrast idea behind my typeface. So I had these really thin junctions every time a curve would go into a stem. So that's shapes such as N, M, U, or even some curved shapes such as D or B. But then when I kind of started drawing more round shapes and when I started drawing more Cyrillic, I understood that some of my shapes, such as O, C, and S, or some of the shapes in Cyrillic, because of the penductus and the construction of the Cyrillic letters, are extremely low contrast. So on one hand, we would have this really thin junctions, and then on the other one, we would have something that's extremely low contrast. So I knew that this can work together. So for example, here on the bottom, you can see the example, an early digitization from March, and then kind of like what it looks like today. Also, when COVID started, I flew back to Serbia, and I kept printing my type big. When I say big, I mean like 6 centimeters X height, and I would pin them on my bathroom wall and just observe from the distance. And it was also a great thing for me to kind of like ask my family what they thought about it and what they liked the most and what was the most legible. So here on the right, you can see a few examples of the weight and width I was testing. So also, I wasn't only thinking about the proportions, I was also thinking about some of the shapes. So as you can see here on the bottom, some of the shapes such as V and E were influenced a lot by cursive, and it's something I really like. It's something that gave a lot of character to my typeface, but unfortunately I was too stubborn, and it took me a while to understand that in a signage typeface I can't really rely on letter recognition, and that something has to be extremely legible, and that you cannot rely on understanding it from the context, because most of the time you don't really know what the context is. So I do admit it took me a while to get rid of these shapes and come up with kind of like a more conventional approach. Also, when it comes to sketching capitals, kind of like the same idea followed. I started really crazy with the marker on paper, and then I had to tone it down over time. I started out with these extremely unbalanced counters in P and R and B. Also, when it comes to Cyrillic, which is usually where the letters are really squarish, really robust, I was kind of thinking of trying to find a way of how to like soften them up a little bit and make them more compatible with the Latin and also inspired by Art Nouveau. So yeah, just over time, I kept toning things down, and eventually I came up with the version I really liked. Another important thing I wanted to talk about was sketching numerals and drawing and thinking about numerals. We're all kind of guilty of this, but we all kind of leave them for the end of our process. We kind of treat them as a set expansion almost. In Petria, I didn't really want to make this mistake, and I wanted to give numerals the same importance as I was giving to the letters. I had a lot of examples of letters on street signage and Art Nouveau inspiration, but unfortunately I didn't have a lot of examples of numerals, so I had to kind of like dig online through old specimens and old photographs to find examples. But I just wanted to pretty much carry the same atmosphere the letters had to the numbers and kind of see how I can transfer some of these shapes onto the numbers as well. So this is what Petria looks like right now. It's a type family that consists of Roman in 2 weights and italic, and it's following both scripts, so Cyrillic and Latin. Right now, it also has a full set of arrows, which I think are extremely important for a project like this. No, I'm just joking, but yeah, I really like them. As I said, I really like arrows, so it's a special slide just for them. This is just some parts of the specimen that you are going to be able to see on the Type Media website in just a few days, hopefully. This is the basic Latin set, as I said, in just the regular weight. Also, drawing diacritics was something I want to mention. It was pretty fun. It was a nice learning experience just because in Serbian we don't have a lot of accented letters. And I'm just kind of like starting out in type design, so for me, I didn't really have a lot of experience with drawing certain accents. So, and also I had this problem of having an extremely tall X height and short ascenders and descenders. So for some of the shapes, such as like traditional sedia, which you can see some of the sketches here on the left, the second sketch, that's kind of like a traditional approach we would go for, but I just didn't have enough space for it. So I was trying to find and looking at other typefaces and trying to find different solutions on how to sketch sedia so it still serves its purpose and it's still legible. So right now, Petria speaks quite a lot of languages. The most important thing about working on Petria for me is that I found a right way to proof my typeface. We would all usually print it on A3 and A4 in a few different sizes, starting from 8 to 20 points, and that's how you would deal with a text typeface. Petria, in certain way, is a text typeface because it had to be extremely legible, but it was also meant for big sizes, so that kind of makes it a little bit different from a traditional text typeface. So for me, I found the best way to do this is to print big, as I said, 6 centimeter X height, and just observe it from the distance. I did use up all of my ink in the toner, but it proved out to be like a really nice way to test my typeface. Here's a little bit more of the numerals. And then this is what Cyrillic looks like. To be honest, I'm really a big fan of Cyrillic. I think I kind of managed to capture Belgrade's vibe and the atmosphere into these shapes. I love how they're sturdy enough to be used for signage, but they're also not like really serious. They're really friendly and really playful. And I'm really keen on the Cyrillic italic especially. A little bit more of the specimen things. And also some of my shapes, some of the letters have alternate characters. A and G, just one of them. So I decided to draw this one story A and then double story G. Yeah, these first two are the defaults, and then these are the alternates, and just some examples here on the right. Also, as I said, I'm a graphic designer, so whenever I was getting a little bit tired of just looking at my font editor, I would go into Illustrator or something else to try and play with the typeface and see how I can actually use it. The italic was a really fun part of the project because I was definitely not comfortable with drawing italic as much as I was comfortable with drawing a Roman. Also, I was really thinking about what kind of message should my italic carry? I know that Roman was going to be used for street signage and for the street signage boards, but I was thinking, what can I do with the italic? There was a lot of these old landmarks and old building of other importance in Belgrade that unfortunately are not properly labeled, and I was thinking maybe italic can be used for this. Maybe italic can be associated with history a little bit more, and maybe italic can be used to write down names of these important people that used to live in these places, or just, as I said, important landmarks. So I knew that kind of like drawing a conventional slanted Roman italic wasn't going to do the job, because if there is not a clear difference between these two styles, I didn't think I needed it. So I was really thinking about how to treat italic. When I was starting out with the Roman, I didn't really know what the proportions of the italic should be like. So what I did is I would slant my Roman in InDesign, and I would also squeeze it a little bit, and then I would just type it next to the Roman and compare how these two, what kind of a texture and color these two would provide together. So I had quite a lot of versions of my italic while I was working on it. Here you can just see 3. So the version 1 was just pretty much slanted Roman with some changes. It was really low contrast, but it was too close to the Roman. As you can see in this paragraph, you can barely tell where italic stops and then Roman starts. Also, I had these kind of like ascending parts on A. They were creating a lot of just blacks in one spot. So yeah, I knew I had to try something else. So then I increased the slant and I increased the contrast, and the junctions and connections became deeper. This definitely did provide a lot more difference when set next to the Roman, but it just wasn't really matching the vibe the Roman had. The Roman was really fun, really playful, and then this italic was really too serious and too strict and too elegant for it. So I knew that the answer was somewhere in between. As I said, there were a lot more versions before I came up with this current one, but the current one is pretty much lowered contrast. These connections and cuts weren't as deep, and yeah, I think it's kind of like a really fun and playful companion to the Roman. Also, since the italic was kind of like associated with history, and I thought there is maybe some space for swashy capitals. I'm really a sucker for swashy capitals and swashy letters. I didn't really have a lot of experience in drawing them. To be honest, I was a little bit scared that I'm taking on something I cannot carry out because of my lack of experience. But I'm really glad I did, because I learned so much on drawing these swashy capitals. So at that point, I was the kind of like approach it here on the left, point and nib approach. At that time, I was looking a lot at the universal penman, and I was just in love with these shapes and in love with these strokes. And I was thinking, what would happen if kind of like I would use point and nib, but then I lower the contrast completely. So then this is what the first sketch looked like. And for me, it was also an excuse just to draw more, just to experiment more. But at the same time, I was really interested in sign painting, and I thought, how can I maybe have sign painting influence these swashy capitals? So I drew something like this on the right. There was a lot of new elements that weren't really a part of the lowercase. Some kind of like serif-like strokes, like also interrupted strokes. Unfortunately, this can maybe be used for something else, and maybe I will continue working on it in the future, but it just was too different from the lowercase, so I decided to go with the first approach. So this is what the swashy capitals look like now. Some of them have ascending or descending strokes. And there's a full set, so Cyrillic and Latin full set of the capitals. So these are just some specimen pages of what italic looks like. These are also just the default capitals that are not swashy. This is what Cyrillic looks like. I'm really a fan of the Cyrillic. I really like the way the Cyrillic turned out. As I said, this is some default capitals compared to the alternate ones. In Latin, this is a little bit more Latin. Some of the shapes require more work, better spacing, because some of them are really complicated and kind of bring these extremely white parts such as L. But yeah. Then also this is Cyrillic. Swashy capitals in Cyrillic were really influenced by handwriting in Serbia specifically, and when I was kind of like thinking about the shapes, I went back to ABC books where we were taught how to write, and some of those cursive shapes were definitely an inspiration for what I drew here. You can definitely see that in letter B, in letter T here, or letter D, which everybody thinks is a Q, by the way, but yeah, I definitely learned a lot. I definitely stepped out of my comfort zone while working on these swashy capitals, and I'm really glad that I did, because I learned a lot. So this is a little bit more of Cyrillic. Also, some of the italic characters have their alternates as well. A little bit more of italic. So as I said, all of these things you will be able to see on the Type in Media website, which is launching in just a few days. So also Cyrillic. When it comes to the acritics, I kind of like had to face the same problems I faced when I was thinking about the Roman diacritics, because of the rather short X height and the rather tall X height and short ascenders and descenders. Some of these shapes had to be rethought a few times. Some numerals as well. And then also the last part of the project was stencil. Stencil was kind of like a way for me to draw something fun, something different, and to experiment a little bit more. And I thought a stencil would be a great style to have in an actual signage typeface. So my starting point was the heaviest weight of the Roman that I printed out in A3 paper, and one night I just kind of like started playing with the whiteout and seeing where I can introduce these stencil cuts and how can I like simplify the shapes. So that pretty much resulted into this quick digitization on the right. That was really nice, but kind of boring, to be honest. So I decided to maybe try out something more. Some of the counters on like A, F, and R, all these endings were the same, and that kind of like provided a little bit of monotony. So I thought that maybe I can experiment more. I also was thinking a lot about handwriting and and also fast writing on the paper, and where the cuts or where would you naturally lift the pen off the paper and stop. So having that in mind, I drew some of these shapes. So here you can see some of the shapes, such as O, are really simple and kind of follow this handwriting logic. So some of the shapes, such as S or C, don't have any cuts at all, because those are the shapes you would write in just like one go without lifting the pen from the paper. And I started out with Latin, and it seemed to work. I really liked the atmosphere it provided, the color. It's definitely, I wanted Petria Roman was really fun, really friendly, and I wanted the stencil to kind of like carry out the same idea. I didn't want it to be like, usually stencils are like really strict or really like serious. I wanted mine to be different, and this kind of was it. I was really starting to like the way this is going, but then I started working on Cyrillic, and some of the kind of like logical things I had going on in Latin is shapes such as N, H, M, or even A, where the curve would go into a stem. I couldn't really carry that out in Cyrillic because of the different pen ductus and just the Cyrillic construction. It looked like a stylistic choice and not something that would occur naturally. So I kind of, at this point, understood that the stencil style is not really going to be a part of my final project. It's definitely going to be a nice exploration I had, but it just definitely required more time. Also, another exploration of stencil was after I saw this board in Serbia. I fell in love with how abstract some of the shapes were, how simplified some of them were. So I thought maybe I can use this and I can draw only capitals, and this can be an answer to my problems and something that I can use for the stencil. So I drew this. I love the numbers. I think they're amazing, and I really like the way that they are simplified and abstract. And I was kind of like thinking of how abstract can I go, and how can I draw shapes where you can still read them but make them completely abstract. So this is what happened. There was a lot of problems and a lot of things that kind of needed more thinking, but stencil is also something that I am thinking about right now, kind of like looking at other examples, different specimens, and I'm kind of like starting from scratch. I don't want to like base it off of Petria Roman anymore. So this is the current design space. So as I said, I have Cyrillic and Latin and Roman in two weights. There's an italic in Cyrillic and Latin in a full set of Swazi Cyrillic and Latin capitals. So that kind of concludes my talk today. Thank you guys so much for listening and being a part of it. I hope you enjoyed this. It was really nice for me to share my process with you and kind of like explain all the thoughts and everything kind of like that went on behind a signage project like this. You guys can always follow me on Instagram. This is my Instagram name right here. You can write to me if you have any questions, and I would love to talk to you about Petria more if you are interested. Thank you so much, guys. Bye.